Towards the end of the summer holidays, Satoru set off on his trip. When he came back again, he looked like he'd put the past to rest. He'd brought back some souvenirs for Soji and Shikako. For Soji, some Hakata ramen he'd asked for, and for Shikako, for some reason, he brought back some blotting paper and a hand mirror he'd bought in Kyoto. Wow, this paper is Yojiya! Apparently, it was some famous cosmetics brand, and Shikako was ecstatic. A friend of hers called her over, and she gave the her it, "Thank you," and rushed off. "So, you stopped in Kyoto too?" Soji asked, and Satoru nodded. "I was on an elementary school trip to Kyoto when my parents were killed in a car accident. My mother had asked me to buy Yojiya blotting paper as a present for her. I looked all over but never managed to find it. A friend later managed to find some and bought it for me, but I never bought it myself." "What about the hand mirror?" "I just thought that I'd like to buy that for Shikako." It's hard to hear all this. Shikako should be the one to hear this, but Suji didn't want her to. He began to wish it had been somebody else who'd run into Satoru the day they rescued the Shizu. He didn't tell Shikako what Satoru had told him about Kyoto. He suppressed his guilty conscience by convincing himself that if Satoru really wanted her to know, he'd tell her himself. Now, he was constantly worried that he was losing his advantage of being Shikaku's childhood friend. She was always calling Satoru by his last name, Miyawaki, while she always called Soji Su-chan. Some time passed before he saw any significance in this. If Shikaku had known Satoru's feelings, she would, no doubt, have been drawn to him. Unlike himself, shamefully struggling to be the kind of man Shikako could be proud of, Satoru was already there, and there was that terrible experience he'd been through as a child. In spite of losing his parents so young, having his precious cat taken away from him, and now not being in time to see it again, Satoru blamed no one for his troubles, didn't see any of it as unfair. If it were him, Soji would give himself over to the tragedy to make it work in his favor. He would make all sorts of lazy excuses, perhaps even exploit it to track Shikako's affections. How could Satoru be so relaxed and natural? The more Soji got to know him, the more he felt driven into a corner. Satoru was a rival he would never be able to beat. He started to feel the lesser man, despite his privileged upbringing. And though he had more to be thankful for than Satoru, he began to feel dissatisfied with life. He started arguing with his parents over nothing, saying malicious things, sometimes reducing his mother to tears. "I have everything I need in life, so why am I such a mean small person? Why can't I be kinder than Satoru, who has so much less?" Shikako, too, had been brought up like Soji, never lacking a thing, yet she never felt like this when she was with Satoru. She seemed to naturally enjoy being with him, and this made Soji feel even more concerned. If things went on like this, he knew he was going to lose Shikako, and he had loved her for so much longer. "I wonder if Satoru has a special girl he likes." These words spilled out from Shikako one day when Satoru wasn't with them. It was the final blow. Soji felt crushed. Later, Soji found himself saying, "I've always loved Shikako, ever since we were kids." This confession was directed not at Shikako, but at Satoru. Soji had expected that when Satoru heard this, he would put a lid on any feelings he himself might have for Shikako. He had deliberately confessed his feelings to Satoru while pretending to seek his advice. Satoru's eyes opened wide in surprise, and after a moment's silence, he smiled. "I get it. You do get it, right? You of all people should definitely get it." Thus, Soji neatly stopped Satoru from declaring his feelings to Shikako, and in the end Satoru stepped aside without ever saying a word about them. In the spring of their last year in high school, Satoru changed schools. His aunt, who was his guardian, often moved around with work, so he was truly sad that his friend was leaving, but all the same felt a rush of relief. At the time, he felt, now things will be okay. "How can you be such a good person when you've been so unlucky?" Suji was grumbling away before he realized what he was doing. It was the wine they'd opened at dinner. He had thought it was a good opportunity to treat Satoru to some local wine, so he'd bought some Agiron red. This variety had a sweet fragrance and taste, and if you didn't watch yourself, it was easy to overdo it. Shikaku was out of the room having a bath, her absence another reason Suji had let down his guard. Satoru smiled wryly. I don't know if I'm a good person or not, but either way, I wasn't unlucky. What are you talking about? Are you denying that life treated you unfairly and trying to make me feel bad by not admitting it? I don't know what you mean. The wine must have gone to your head. Try sobering up a bit before Shikaku finishes her bath. Satoru pulled the wine bottle out of Soji's reach. We could get all limp and squeezy when we have catnip. For humans, wine seems to do the trick. Satoru would occasionally drink alcohol at home, hit down a few while watching one of those games with balls that humans like, baseball or soccer, and start feeling happy, and soon tumbled sideways onto the floor. If I inadvertently passed near him, he'd grab me and hug me to his face, saying, Nana-chan, in a syrupy voice, and I couldn't stand it, so I tried to keep my distance. Plus, his stank of alcohol. There had been times when he drank away from the house and came back smelling of liquor, but he was always in a good mood, so I used to be convinced that when humans drank it always made them cheerful, like catnip for cats. I'd never encountered someone like Soji, who got all gloomy and moody when he drank. When Chicago went to have a bath, he suddenly started pouting at Satoru, almost like he was cowering before him. If drinking isn't fun, then why do it? I was hanging off the top of the TV in the sitting room, eyeing the two men as they talk, until Satoru finally removed the bottle of wine from the table. By the way, I became really fond of the TV there. Ours at home was thin and flat like a board, but the one there was more of a box, very enticing for a cat. Plus, it was faintly warm and made my tummy feel toasty. Fantastic in the winter, I imagined. It's really old, Momo told me. In the past, all TVs were this shape, apparently. Going from this perfect design to an impractical flat shape is, if you ask me, a step backwards technology-wise. Momo told me that you could tell how old the cat was by whether or not they knew about these boxy TVs. In that house, Shikaku gave priority to making things comfortable for cats, and she dismissed the idea of getting one of the blood TVs. A splendid decision, in my opinion. Why the glam look? If you're bored of it, then I'll have it back, Momo said to me. She was stretching out her long limbs on a nearby sofa. She'd allowed me, the guest, to take her special seat on top of the TV. It's not that I'm bored, it's just I cast a glance at the worn down Suji. I thought they were friends, but it doesn't look as though Suji likes Satoru very much, Momo suggested. That can't be true, I said. Don't think he wants him here, and yet he went out especially yesterday to buy that wine. Said he'd like Satoru to try it. Why flare up at Satoru like that then? Why say things about Satoru's character as though he's upset that he's such a good person? He likes him, but he also invites him. My master wants to be like your master. I don't get it. Satoru is Satoru, and Soji is Suji. Exactly, but the master seems to feel that if he could be like Satoru, then Shikaku would love him more. Dear me, it sounds like it's a pretty big thing for him. Shikaku used to really like your master, is what I gather, Momo clarified. This was going way back, way before Momo was born, when these humans were young. She said she heard it from the cat who lived with them previously. What did Satoru think? Did he like Shikaku too? If a woman who held onto an old boxy TV for the sake of a cat was Satoru's wife, now that might be really wonderful, is what I was thinking. Well, that's not something we know. It's just that when it comes to Shikaku, the master seems to have a guilty conscience regarding Satoru, said Momo. Sounds like an awkward business to me. I mean, Shikaku ended up choosing Shuji and became his wife, so what's the problem? Among cats, when a female chooses a mate, it's a very clear cat thing, not just among cats, but with all animals. The female's judgment about love is absolute. Of course, I haven't experienced true love myself, having been looked after by Satoru since I was young. I was a little too gentle to have won the heart of a female when I was young. If I'd had a bigger face and a sterner expression, I might have. Like Yosemite. If he were a cat, he'd definitely be a hit with the ladies. But it makes sense now. That mat of a dog is Suji's, isn't it? Dogs the world over just aren't very level-headed about things. Their master says jump, and they ask, how high? So perhaps Suji's dog is trying to take the side of his gloomy master. With cats, though, the master can throw a tantrum, but cats don't necessarily jump. Cats always follow their own path. Toramono was still young and lacked subtlety. In the evening, they let the dog inside the house, but led him immediately to another room. He didn't come at us barking like he did when we first met, but since he had been so terribly rude to Satoru, he and I were on high alert. Well, you seem to have had a few already. Shikaku was out of the bat. Are you going to bed now? Shikaku asked, as though pacifying a child, to which Soji replied, Nope, shaking his head like a spoiled brat. If you and Satoru are staying up, then I will too. Shikaku and Satoru looked at each other with a smile. Their faces were glowing. Is that really that endearing? To me, it just looks embarrassing. Creaky. I really hope I don't look like that when I sniff a bit of catnip. After a while, Satoru said, I'm feeling sleepy now, so I'm off to bed. Come on. Satoru helped Soji to his feet, but perhaps he was heavier than he expected, or his body more limp, because he began to stagger. Shikaku got up quickly to help prop Soji up. In this way, the two of them got Soji to bed. Not long after Satoru moved away with his aunt, Soji started going out with Shikaku. They were both aiming to get into the same college. They talked it over and decided on a university in Tokyo. Shikaku was planning to help out with the orchard business in the future, so if she didn't go to college outside the prefecture, she would end up spending her whole life within the confines of the district she grew up in. It was an entirely natural, innocent desire for a young girl to want to spend some part of her life in the big city. They both passed the university entrance exams, and Shikaku was to live with relatives in Tokyo, while Soji would stay in the dorm. It was a double room, and he was a bit concerned about whether he'd get on with his roommate, but the dorm had 2 points in its favor: the low rent and the convenient location. He and his roommate arranged to meet up before the college entrance ceremony, and Soji set off, map in hand, down the unfamiliar streets to locate his dorm. The winding back streets confused him, and he wandered round in circles for a while, but he finally arrived, not much later than the scheduled time. He was filling out forms at the reception desk when it happened. Soji? He didn't know anyone yet and turned around uncertainly. When he saw who it was, he was stunned. Satoru, he said, before his brain froze. It was great to meet an old friend like this in an unfamiliar place, but at the same time, the question of why Satoru was here, paired with his still guilty conscience, began to play on his mind. I heard from Shikaku that she was applying to this college, and I thought maybe you were too. I see I was right. You heard from her? You mean you guys met after you moved away? No, not at all. She wrote to me. This was back when high school students didn't all have mobile phones. I've given you guys my new address, remember? And Shikaku wrote me a letter. I never got a letter from you, though, Satoru said, teasingly. Hey, but I did call you a few times. Well, I guess when friends grow up, they lose touch. It's the same with my pals from junior high, though we talk a lot on the phone. When I got the letter from Shikaku, I thought, whoa, girls really are conscientious. We've written to each other a few times since. And in one of the letters Satoru had apparently read about which college Shikaku was applying to. Shikaku never told me you were applying here, Satoru. That makes sense, since I never told her. I reckoned if one of us didn't get it, it would feel kind of awkward. Now that he understood, Soji realized there was nothing to it, but still he had his suspicions, and that was the problem. Since we're both here, why don't we ask them if we can share a room? Satoru asked. My roommate hasn't appeared yet, and if we arrange it now, it shouldn't be a problem. Satoru had been in the dorm for a week already, and his kind nature meant he had already made a network of acquaintances, so they managed to swap roommates. Shikaku was delighted that Satoru was attending the same college, but sulked about not being told. Why didn't you let me know? She asked. She had been just about to write a letter to him to let him know that she and Soji had both got into the same college. The first semester flew by, and before they knew it, the second semester had started. Soji, I got a gift from one of the second years. Satoru showed him some cans of beer, and a market brand that was seldom discounted. 20 was the legal drinking age, but for college students that was just official policy, and in the dorm drinks were circulated even between underage students. They made sure, though, that things didn't get out of hand, and were careful to avoid the eagle-eyed dorm mother whenever there was alcohol around. Oh, Then I'll catch some snacks to go with it. Dorm students often got food parcels from home, and if the students shared whatever they received, they could all get some pretty nice things. She had just received some juicy grapes, and trading up, he managed to talk a student hailing from Hokkaido into letting him have some salmon fillets and sweets that were a specialty of the student's hometown. Satoru would get merry when he drank, but he wasn't much of a drinker. 2 cans of beer were all it took before his eyes grew bloodshot. For some reason, the talk turned to an in-dorm romance. A freshman, quite a frivolous guy, had made repeated moves on another girl in the dorm and kept getting shot down. The other guys found it funny, but also tried to cheer him up. How many times has he been rejected? 11 so far. Satoru, the informant, passed this on to Soji and chuckled. It's so funny, he won't give in. He said that during the second semester he's going to hit the 20 mark. What for? Is he aiming to break some kind of record for being rejected? He's lost sight of the goal. I know, but I kind of combine that sort of recklessness. Satoru's red eyes sparkled. You know, in high school I sort of had a thing for Shikako. The one thing Suji had hoped never to hear. But since you were there, I reckoned it was hopeless. Still, even if I had been rejected, I wish I'd at least told her. If he had, then his story would have been different. Unable to keep it in, his voice crackled. Please, don't ever tell Shikako. I wish I'd at least told her. His story might still be different even now. Please. Miserably bowing his head, Suji thought, how shameful can I get? I know very well how miserable I look, yet I still go ahead and beg him. Satoru seemed touched by his words, and his eyes widened a little, just as they had when Suji had asked for advice and sat him down. Don't worry about it, he smiled. You two probably have a stronger relationship than you think you do. So Suji was, in the end, successful in keeping Satoru quiet. Suji graduated from college, returned to his hometown, and after a few years married Shikako. Satoru came to the wedding. His story wasn't going to be rewritten now. They'd come too far for that. Still, sometimes Suji would get a bit panicky when he thought of Satoru. Punishment, he thought, for having suppressed his friend's words all those years ago. If he took in Satoru's cat, it would be a thorn in his side that would torment him for the rest of his life. But still, Satoru was clearly troubled about what to do with his cat and had come to ask for his help, and since Suji had won out with Shikako through unfair methods, he felt it was his duty to help. It may seem weird for such a petty and cowardly guy like me to do this so late in the day, Suji thought, but I really do like you, Satoru. You've had a much, much harder life than I have. Yet you've always remained generous and kind. You blow me away. I've always wanted to be more like you, if only I could be. The next morning, another meeting between the dog and me was arranged. After breakfast, Shikako left the dining room to fetch him. Be a good boy this time, Tora, Shikako cautioned him as he stood behind the fence. Suji, looking worried, was pacing around the dining room. Satoru looked a little worried too. The only ones who kept their cool were Momo and yours truly. Breakfast for me was a special tuna blend with a side of chicken breast, so I was feeling pleasantly full. Give it your best shot, you hound. The door to the room swung open. The dog had planted himself in the doorway and was staring hard in my direction. He avoided Satoru's eyes. Too damn right. Yesterday, on several occasions, Suji had scolded the dog, reminded him that Satoru was his good friend and that he mustn't bark at him. That being the case, there was only one other he could turn his fire on. You want it, pal? Then I'm more than ready for you. The dog began to bark at me in such a frenzy he looked on the verge of losing it. Ignoring the cries of the humans, I urged my back as high as it could go and made my fur stand on end. You don't fool around, do you? Momo murmured. High praise indeed. The dog would not stop barking. Satoru rushed over to hold me down so I wouldn't leap out at the stupid dog. As long as you're here, the master and his wife will be thinking of Satoru. It's painful for my master if his wife remembers him. I don't need to hear that. If it's a house with a stupid hound like you need, then I'm calling the whole thing off on my own. If it came to a fight, I was several leagues above this mat. You may talk big, but I bet you've never been in a life and death scrape. Bet you've never been in the kind of fight over territory where, if you lose, you'll have nothing to eat for days. Have you, you spoiled high and mighty hound? I gave him an earful of the kind of spoil I'd perfected over the course of numerous scenes of carnage. The kind of rough language to which I can't subject you polite ladies and gentlemen. Momo, surveying all this with total disinterest from her perch atop the TV, smiled. Pardon me, I told her. My one regret is besmirching the ears of a refined lady like yourself with such a language. Go home, damn you! The hound was close to tears, and still barking his head off. A piddling 3-year-old dog who's always worn a collar thinks he's going to beat me? Not in 100 years, my friend. Momo's lived twice as long as me, and I've lived twice as long as you, pal. I won't allow someone in this house who reminds the master and his wife of Satoru. Besides, shut it. Say any more and I'll make you regret it. I had to admire the dog, though, since he still wouldn't shut up. He really was wound up. Besides, your owner smells like he's not going to make it. I told you to shut it. Nana, Satoru yelled at me. I had escaped from his grasp and swiped the dog with my claws. Ruff! The dog's scream rang out. 3 neat rows of wounds ran down his brindled muscle, and 3 lines of blood were faintly oozing out. But still, Toramaru didn't put his tail between his legs. Several times, he looked as though he was about to lower it at least. But then he forced it up again, and growled more deeply. Stop it, Nana! You'll hurt him! The fight was already won, so I meekly let Satoru pick me up. I'm so sorry, Satoru apologized over and over to Toramaru, and to Suji and Shikako. It's okay, I'm just glad Nana didn't get beaten. Shikako, turning pale, let out a sigh. Suji gave Toramaru a good rap on the head with his fist. If you had really beaten Nana, he would have died, you know. For the first time, Toramaru let his tail sag between his legs, and he glared at me regretfully. Okay, I understand. I won't count that among my victories. I'm sorry, I really appreciate you saying you'd look after Nana for me, but I'm going to take him back home. Satoru sounded quite sad about this. It wouldn't be good for Toramaru either, to have to live with a cat he doesn't get on with. Satoru fetched the basket. As I stepped in obediently, I glanced back at Toramaru. Thank you, Toramaru. Toramaru looked a little dubious. I came here on a trip with Satoru, not to be left behind here in this house. I was trying to come up with a plan so we could go home together, and thanks to you, it has all worked out smoothly. Toramaru lowered his eyes and tilted his head, and Satoru and I headed towards the silver van. They brought Toramaru out on a lead to see us off. Suji kept a tight hold of it, wrapping it a few times around his hand. Momo came out of her own accord to say goodbye. It's been a long time since I've seen a fight as definitive as that, she said, paying me a compliment. I'm so sorry it's turned out this way. I'm just glad Nana didn't get hurt. We really did hope to look after him. Suji and Shikako apologized, one after the other, but that only made Satoru uncomfortable, which was understandable, seeing as how the only one who actually hurt anyone was in the end moi. As usual, before Satoru got the van on the move, the old friends seemed to find it painful to say goodbye. Even after Satoru was behind the wheel, Shikako kept saying she had forgotten to give him this or that, and handing him one present after another. Her home-grown herbs, some fruit, and more fruit. We really had better be going. Oh, by the way, Satoru called out of the open window, when I was in high school, I really liked you, Shikako. Did you know that? The way he said it was pretty blasé. Suji's face stiffened, and Shikako said, What? Then she blinked like a pigeon that had just been shot by a pea shooter, and gave a little laugh. That was so long ago, why bring it up now? Yeah, I guess you're right. The two of them chuckled. Suji stood there, astonished, then gave a late to the party laugh. He might have been laughing, but he looked almost ready to cry. The van had started moving down the drive when there was a shout. Toramaru! Toramaru wrenched hard, struggling to break free from the lead. Hey cat! Toramaru was calling me. You can stay. The master was laughing with the missus and Satoru, so it's all okay now for you to stay. You idiot. I told you I had no intention of being left behind from the very start. Tora, can't you at least behave when you're saying goodbye? Suji tugged angrily at the lead. Don't be cross with him. He was trying to stop me leaving. But what with Tora barking his head off earlier, Suji thought he was still angry. Is he upset? Asked Satoru. He looked in the rear view mirror at the receding figures. His bark sounds different from before. That's why I like you, Satoru. You're perceptive about things like that. The silver van gave a little beep of its horn before turning a corner, sending dust into the air and leaving the bed and breakfast far behind. It would have been perfect if they could have looked after you. There you go again, Satoru. That's just sure grapes. Mount Fuji's snow well behind us. If you intend to come and fetch me back one day, then you shouldn't leave me there in the first place. I was standing on my hind legs and pawing the top of the back seat to see out of the rear window, and Satoru laughed. The sea might not have been your cup of tea, but you do seem to have taken a liking to Mount Fuji. 'Cause Mount Fuji doesn't make that belly-shaking roar and doesn't have that perpetual motion that will swallow me up. I hope we can see it again together. Yeah, let's do that someday. And let's visit Suji and Shikako again. We had such a nice view of Mount Fuji from our bedroom, and also, you like that old picture tube TV too, didn't you? Yes, that's the ticket. That box-shaped TV was perfect, just the right size to lie down, all toasty warm. Say, Satoru, what if we were to get a box-shaped TV like that? Sorry that ours is the thin type, they don't sell the tube TVs anymore. Ah, such a pity. But that's okay, I can think of it as a special attraction for when we visit the Sujis next time. And one other thing, the next time we visit, I bet you Toramaru will wag his tail at us. In the evening, a reservation came in at the bed and breakfast for the night. Maybe we should keep Toramaru tied up. True, he might still be worked up because of his fight with Nana. Suji took Toramaru outside and chained him to the kennel. Then he turned to Shikako, who had followed him. About what Satoru said a little while ago. What? Are you bothered by that? Shikako asked. Ouch, that hit home. No, it's not that, Suji stammered. I was just wondering how you would have taken it if Satoru had told you he liked you when we were still in high school. Who knows, Shikako said, shrugging. Unless we could go back in time, I don't know how I would have reacted. A spot-on answer to which he had no reply. It might have been nice, though, to be a young girl wavering between the affections of two boys. Wavering? This took him by surprise, and he couldn't help but ask her what she meant. Of course I would have wavered, Shikako laughed. If I had two boys liking me at the same time, then that would definitely have piqued my interest. Suji felt like weeping, but managed to control himself. I don't know which of us two she would have chosen, he thought, but at least I was included in the lineup, and he felt his sense of inferiority and jealousy diminish a little. The next time I see Satoru, I know I can be a much better friend. Now that is a happy thought.